Welcome to the IREL podcast. Are you sick and tired of real estate gurus pitching their next pre-construction deal only to find out years later they were completely wrong? Worried the next overseas conference you spend thousands to attend will only be used to sell overpriced lots in deserted developments? Join thousands of other international real estate seekers who are looking for their place in paradise without the sales pitch. Straight from your host, Taylor White.
Hey, real estate seeker, welcome to the Overseas Property Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor White. I am proud to say this episode is brought to your earbuds courtesy of my friends at Shoeboxed. Shoeboxed is the fastest way to turn a pile of receipts into digital data to save you time, money, and hassle. The best part, you can get started completely free. Head on over to irelpodcast.com/shoe for more details. We are getting all Jason Bourne with it today when I sit down and speak with Edmund John from Flag Theory, which is a strategic internationalization process achieved by planting flags in different countries designed to impact and increase your personal freedom, time, and wealth. We will cover the 6 flags of passport, residency, offshore incorporation, assets, physical land, and data security. And Edmund finishes up by creating the perfect diversified person. Edmund does an amazing job of simplifying difficult topics. Instead of telling you more, let's join Edmund from Thailand. What's going on, Edmund? It's Taylor White. I'm excited to have you on the podcast today, coming from one of my favorite countries in the world, Thailand. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on the call, Taylor. I am an expatriate entrepreneur. I run a business in Thailand. I run a development shop here, and I also have a few other businesses. I think the one that we'll be talking today is my website, Flag Theory.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to get you on, Edmund, about Flag Theory. I'm a huge fan of the 6 flags, which I think started maybe in the 40s with Uncle Harry Schultz. Is that correct?
Right. This is not something that I have come up with originally. This is more of something that I'm kind of trying to reinvent and bring into the 21st century, apply modern day laws and technologies in order to make it relevant to the PTs of the world. PTs meaning permanent travelers or prior taxpayer, whatever you want to call yourselves.
So why don't we kind of start from the beginning? First off, what is Flag Theory?
So Flag Theory is essentially a methodology for looking at your personal and business assets and calling them flags. So within these personal business assets, you normally have these restricted to one jurisdiction. And within that jurisdiction, you can plant the flag. So that's a little bit wordy. Let's talk about it in kind of layman terminology. If I were to set up a bank account in Singapore and take advantage of the great banking laws and banking freedom allowed in Singapore, of course, there's no exchange controls there. The money tends to be relatively safe. That would be called planting a banking flag in Singapore. And that would be kind of the third flag of Flag Theory.
So who is this for? What types of people would be interested in banking in one place, getting a residency someplace else, getting a passport someplace else? Who is this for?
Sure. So I would say that the 2 groups of people who get the best use out of it are entrepreneurs who have more of an international business, and investors also tend to give pretty good mileage out of this. But many of the listeners of your podcast might get some good mileage as well. If you're an expatriate entrepreneur, you're interested in international real estate, why not look at a place where you can get residency or citizenship by making that investment in land and property? A place like St. Kitts and Nevis, for instance, offers up a passport if you're willing to spend over $500,000 in real estate there. There's other countries around the world like Australia, New Zealand, even the United States has a program for those who are willing to invest and are looking to receive residency or citizenship. The list really goes on. A lot of different countries. Spain is one of them, Uruguay, Paraguay. There's a lot of different countries that are available.
Before we get into that aspect, why don't we backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit more about what a PT is? I know growing up, I was a big fan of Harry Schultz. I don't know if you know the fictitious person, and I'm doing air quotes here, Grandpa, Dr. W.G. Hill. And it kind of started with PT, or perpetual traveler. past taxpayer, passing through, whatever you want to put the PT to. Talk a little bit more about, in your own definition, what's a PT?
So PT is kind of this, it's a term which gets tossed around a lot, but I think that basically what it means is that you kind of have the freedom and the autonomy to control your own affairs, and you're basically in charge of your own life. You're deciding, where the best places in the world for me to do X are strategically, and looking at a place and saying, okay, well, this might not be the ideal place for me right now because whatever is going on, there's a banking crisis, or there's wars, or there's destitute poverty, or whatever it is that happens to kind of be in that one area. Why not move somewhere and plant a flag in some place that has advantages to it, and then seek other people who think like-minded to you? It can mean a lot of different things, but for me, it really means seeking areas where you can get the most freedom, privacy, and wealth in a given location.
Okay, so now we have 6 flags that we're going to talk about. And I know there could be less, there could be more, but we're going to talk about 6. And just briefly, we're going to flag 1, passport, flag 2, residency, flag 3, offshore company, flag 4, assets, flag 5, physical land, and then flag 6, data security. Why don't we start with a passport? Why would somebody want a second passport?
Well, a better question is, why would someone not want a second passport? In the United States, only 30% of the population actually has a passport, which is mind-boggling to me. And probably the listeners of your podcast don't need to be convinced of the value of their passport, but it's really one of the most important documents that you'll ever own. I mean, it's your identity, and it gives you the right to travel around the world. It's in some ways amazing that you need a little book in order to freely move about the world, but you actually do. And that little book is pretty important. Really, it's hard to say the reasons why it's valuable to have a passport, but it kind of can go the other way. It's why wouldn't it be valuable to have a passport? If you have a second passport, you kind of have the ultimate insurance policy. If anything ever really goes wrong, then you kind of have this travel document that could hopefully get you out of Dodge. If, let's say that you're American and you're on a flight and there's some kind of terrorist activity and they ask for people for their passports, I wouldn't necessarily want to be pulling out an American passport then. That's one argument that's been made. I don't know if that's the strongest argument, but it's one that's been made. I really think it's more about just kind of increasing your freedom overall. But many Americans also think that what they find is that you have this worldwide tax obligation. It becomes very burdensome. So in the past years, there have been many Americans that have actually renounced their citizenship because they've acquired a second passport. Now, that's a big decision and probably not one that you should take very lightly, but that it would be necessary for you to secure a second citizenship if you were going to renounce your U.S. citizenship. Just to reiterate that one more time, the only reason, a reason why Americans have renounced their citizenship in previous years is because of the worldwide tax obligation. As an American, you have a worldwide tax obligation to report on all of your foreign earnings, any foreign companies that you own with Forms 5471, any foreign bank accounts with TDF 90-22.1. And really, you should be seeking advice from a lawyer, accountant, and attorney about all of the things that we're talking about today. Don't rely on me. And if I make a slip up, please don't sue me. That would be my caveat moving forward.
And certainly don't listen to me, Edmund. The first thing that comes to mind, I'm from the States, is you hear this word, and I don't think it's a word that's used anyplace else, un-American. It's un-American to want to live someplace else. It's un-American to want to travel someplace else. All the great things are here. It's un-American to want to have a passport someplace else, or it's illegal. What would you say to people that are listening that have the thoughts in their mind that it's un-American or un-Thai or un-Paraguay, whatever it is, wherever they're from? What do you have to say about that?
Well, it's certainly not illegal to get a second passport, at least if you're American. In some countries, such as India, they don't recognize dual citizenship. But to your question, what does it mean to be un-American? I think that is a term that's distinctly American. And I think it's a little bit of a shame because America is obviously a place that has a tremendous amount of wealth and affluence and things to do. And it's a massive country with, very, very, very many opportunities. But at the same time, there's also opportunities outside of America. And to have such a myopic approach and kind of look at it as if you're the greatest is something that I think irks people from otherwhere in the world. And I wish that was something that Americans could kind of reconsider, as if everything is always right because it's, quote, American. There can be other ways of doing things. And that's all I'd have to say on that. I mean, America is an amazing place. I absolutely love the time whenever I spend it in America, but I'm also very happy to live and travel in other places of the world as well.
Okay, so let's cut straight to the chase, Edmund. What are some great places that you might want to get a second passport from?
Definitely. Well, A lot of people, when I'm asked this question, expect it to be an instant passport program. So there's several countries in the world where you can make an investment and you'll receive passport within a timeline of, say, 1 year. So namely, Dominica, not to be confused with the Dominican Republic, is one such place. And another place I mentioned earlier, St. Kitts and Nevis. So if your assets, liquid assets are over, $1 million and you're looking for a second residency, second passport, then one of these places might be a very quick and easy place for you to go through that process. If you don't have a criminal background record and you're willing to make an investment of, say, $500,000, then St. Kitts and Nevis would be happy to have you as a Kittian citizen. Beyond that, if your scope and your timeline is a little bit longer and you don't mind spending some time in the country, then there are lots of places that open up that would accept you as a citizen, but you'd be required to kind of live there for a longer time. Some of these places might be Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, in South America, Ecuador as well. In Europe, there's many different places where if you're a descendant of an ancestor from, say, Hungary, there's an easy citizenship program that you can pass there if you can prove that you're a direct descendant of a Hungarian citizen. Ireland is another such place where if you're a descendant of an Irish ancestry, or even if you'd like to make an investment in Ireland, they also have programs for that as well. So there's a lot of different places around the world that kind of, once you recognize the laws, you can be able to go and plant a flag there and have that second passport, second residency available to you. And it's something which is also, very interesting. We have one life, and do you really want to spend it confined within the borders of one country, regardless of where you're from? I mean, for me, the answer is just absolutely no. I'd love to see and explore the world and see what's out there.
And then, of course, when we say get a second passport from a country, let's just say Brazil, we're not saying to always live in Brazil. You're just saying to have a second passport as a just in case. Maybe it's easier to bank someplace else if you're a Brazilian citizen versus someplace else. Maybe it's better to pass to travel through. So there's certain reasons why, but you're not talking about living there full time. You're just talking about having a second passport.
Well, you're more than entitled to live there full time. You'd be an actual citizen. And, quite frankly, I think that if you are going to become a citizen of a place, that's a pretty large obligation for both the country and for yourself. So you should probably think about it, do your research, and make sure that this is a place that you actually want to be a citizen if you're going to go take that plunge. But there is certainly a wealth of opportunities available, particularly if you're a person of affluence and you're able to travel around the world. There's a number of different doors that would be open to you.
Okay, Evan, why don't we jump to flag 2, which is residency. What would you define residency as, and how is that different than getting a passport?
I'd say it's a lot different than getting a visa. So when you have a visa, you're constantly having to bounce into countries, bounce out of countries. So if anyone's ever, traveled, Americans have a tough time recognizing the problem here because we have a very strong passport. We can go visa free to hundreds of countries, literally. Well, under 200, but hundreds meaning over 150. And if you're a citizen of, say, the Philippines, that's just not the case. So you're not going to be able to hop on a plane, land in Europe, and be able to travel around. You'd need to arrange a visa beforehand. You'd have to leave after a certain amount of time, and it would be very burdensome to do that. So becoming a resident of a place gives you the ability to live there. And there are also often perks such as owning real estate. And that's obviously major advantage for the people listening to this call. So I think that the residency is a step below citizenship. You're obviously not becoming a full-fledged citizen of the state, but oftentimes with residency in the U.S., you could compare it to a green card. You have the right to freely travel in and out. You have the right to own real estate in many instances. And it's just kind of a level above a tourist in terms of dealing with that country, doing business there, living there. You're no longer a tourist, you're a resident.
So why don't you provide some examples of countries that people might want to consider if they want to get involved in real estate?
Definitely. So real estate in particular, New Zealand has a very interesting real estate program where if you make an investment, they have 2 different schemes. They have an investor scheme and an investor plus scheme. And depending on the amount of capital that you're willing to invest, you're able to get an immediate residency, and then that residency can be worked towards a citizenship. So that's typically how the procedure goes in many different countries. Spain has also in the past few years opened up a fantastic residency program for investors who are looking at real estate in the country. So to me, it would make more sense to, instead of just looking for a residency, which is, looking for real estate investment, which is purely monetary based, where you're going to get an ROI of, say, 10% yield year over year. Why not look for 10% ROI year over year, but also look at a place where you're able to establish a residency flag or establish a citizenship flag, where you kind of have this get out of jail free card. If anything's going crazy in the world and you need a place to live, you can say, well, we're a citizen of X country or we're a resident of Y country. Why don't we move there and kind of wait until the dust settles? It's kind of that. The PTs also call themselves thoroughly prepared. It's this idea that, or prepared thoroughly rather, it's this idea that you don't really want to put all your eggs in one basket. You recognize that you have a lot of eggs in your basket and we need to spread those out accordingly.
So then, Edmund, are you talking about having flag 1, which is a passport, in a different country than flag 2, which is residency?
Yes. So
okay.
Ideally that's the case, although there are many instances where you could, of course, lump them together. And maybe it kind of varies case to case.
So why don't we hop on to flag 3, which is Offshore Incorporation. Why go offshore?
Well, many times it's for the tax and the liability purposes, although mostly for the liability purposes. If you're American, it's illegal to actually do it for the express purpose of avoiding taxes if you're American. But let's just say that we have an instance where there is an Australian citizen. He's living abroad in Thailand and he has an offshore company in Hong Kong. As long as he's not providing, let's say that he's a resident of Thailand, so he's not in Australia. He's actually done the things so that the ATO no longer considers him a tax resident of Thailand. He has an offshore company in Hong Kong, although they don't call it offshore company in Hong Kong. It can be tax-free if you don't deal with Hong Kong citizens or residents. And then he's not doing any business with Thailand. He's retired in Thailand and he's not working. That business in Hong Kong might hold some passive real estate investments somewhere else in the world. He can basically structure that so that he's not necessarily paying taxes in any place. Now, this is very high level scope. I'm not talking about a specific person, nor am I suggesting that anyone on this call can adopt a strategy and completely have a 0% tax rate. This is just a hypothetical example, but it's a hypothetical example that's been proven by certain people throughout the years. And that's kind of the way that you look at it is, if I have this passport that I don't necessarily have a tax obligation on a worldwide basis. The U.S. is really the only country in the world besides Eritrea that has a worldwide tax obligation, so it could be a British citizen as well. You have a residency somewhere else, so that British citizen has a resident of the Cayman Islands, and then they have an offshore company in BVI. It's possible that that British citizen in that situation might not have any tax obligations whatsoever either. So those are a couple quick examples of how you might structure that.
And then, of course, if you aren't from the States, one state inside the U.S. is Wyoming that you might want to incorporate too.
Well, yes. I mean, if you're living inside of the States, there are certain states which don't have sales tax or income tax. So, for instance, Florida is one such state that doesn't have, I believe it's sales or income tax. You might not want to quote me on that, but I believe Florida is one such state. Wyoming is one such state, Nevada, Delaware. So these are the states that tend to have the most incorporations because they have very advantageous tax policies and really pro-business qualities, where if you look at a state like Wyoming, if you set up an LLC there, you'll have charging order protection. So what that means is that if someone ever wants to come sue you and they are successful in a lawsuit against your LLC, which holds, let's say, real estate assets, they would not be able to liquidate multiple different assets if they were held by you personally. Whereas in Florida, if you are sued and you have, let's say, 3 condominiums within one LLC, that'd be a very bad situation for you to be in, because they'd be able to essentially receive a charging order against the LLC, which would liquidate all of the assets that were held within the LLC potentially. So I know that there's some legal nuances there. I'm happy to kind of dive in there if that would be useful for any of your listeners. But basically, the long short of it is that you'd want to talk to your lawyer about what is the best way to structure my real estate portfolio so that my assets are segmented into different legal entities where each one is kind of protected both outside in and inside out through asset protection. So outside in being, if I'm sued personally, the assets held within the legal entity aren't up for grabs. And then inside out, if I'm sued in the legal entity, say that one LLC, then my assets personally aren't up for grabs. And there's specific ways and even domestic structuring plans that can establish kind of a better asset protection situation, particularly for real estate investors, because there's a lot of physical assets there.
Why don't we jump into flag 4, which is assets. Now, when we talk about assets, is that just liquid assets as far as money in a bank account, or is that anything that you consider an asset?
Yeah, I would consider liquid assets. And I really consider anything which isn't, say, a functioning business that you're going to have to manage, because that, and really something that's come about in the last 10, 20 years has been kind of these internet businesses, which are more fluid. It's, where is a base of a website? Well, you could say it's where it's registered and where it's hosted and where the operations take place, but you can structure those things in many cases, and you could structure that advantageously with an offshore company. Whereas when you're looking to actually place physical assets, oftentimes they'll have to be somewhere. So if you hold gold as part of as an asset class in your portfolio, then you might want to look at where's the best place strategically around the world to hold that gold. Maybe it might be Singapore, it might be Switzerland, it might be Hong Kong. And you'd want to examine which is the best jurisdiction for me to take this asset and put it there. Where is the best place for me to take this offshore company and place it? Where is the best place for me to get residency? Where's an ideal location for a second passport? It's kind of like, the idea would be that you examine each of these categories individually, and that would give you the best holistic picture, because then your sovereign risk in any one area is decreased substantially.
Where would be some great places right now to have a bank account?
Well, quite frankly, for Americans, a lot of places around the world are actually turning away Americans because of the fact of compliance laws, which are quite burdensome on foreign banks. But for me personally, I bank in Singapore, and I enjoy banking in Singapore. It's great, and I feel safe with my money there. I also bank in Thailand because I have a Thai business here, and I also bank in the U.S. I think that the U.S. is also a fantastic place to bank. I just wouldn't want to keep 100% of my assets in any one place, no matter what the place is. I just believe that personally, that having an international strategy is an ideal setup. Hong Kong is another place where I would really recommend getting a bank account if you're not turned away by the banker the moment you show them your U.S. passport.
And then there's 3 spots in Latin America that I know are talked about quite a bit. What are your thoughts on places like Belize, Panama, or Uruguay?
I think that Belize in particular is a place where I wouldn't look to bank, just because there can be some capital controls in that country. So even though it's rather easy to transfer your money in, so at times it can be difficult to get it out. Although they are...
Which is important.
It's very important. Panama is pretty much the financial center of Central America. So I don't think that you'd be doing yourself any harm having a bank account in Panama. And then the third place that you had mentioned was...
is Uruguay.
Uruguay. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you stay in Punta del Este, you think easily that you're in Western Europe on any given summer day. But yeah, I think that it can be good. My perspective tends to lie more in Asia. I believe that's where kind of the growth that we'll see in the next 10, 20 years will happen. So that's where I position myself in particular. But there's some fantastic real estate opportunities in South America, and you would do well to have a bank account in kind of one of those 3 countries if you're going to be moving some assets around in South America. Those could be some good base of operations.
And then flag 5, of course, we have physical land, maybe farmland. What are some great areas, some great jurisdictions around the world to have physical land? And then why would you want to have physical land?
Sure. Well, I think that physical land is really one of the few asset classes that can't really depreciate. I don't think that you see farmland going down in price very often. So if you have excess capital and you have that high class problem, then what you'd want to do is look for physical assets which really aren't going to depreciate and hopefully will appreciate over time, as well as pay you an income. And physical land is one such way to do that. And so in terms of particular jurisdictions you might want to examine, I think that Australia has a good land program, as does New Zealand. I like to do contracts in English and common law, so I tend to be biased towards jurisdictions which offer those advantages. Thailand is one such place where you wouldn't necessarily want to buy land. You can buy condominiums here as a foreigner, but in terms of buying land as a foreigner in Thailand, the land restrictions are very, very strict. In fact, 99% of the time you're not able to buy land as a foreigner. There's maybe 1% of the time if you have what's called a BOI company, a Board of Investment Approved company, then you're entitled to up to 1 rai of land for yourself personally and up to 3 rai for the business. Other places that I think are attractive are Paraguay and Uruguay and Ecuador. But really, I would be super careful when buying land in South America. I'd want to make sure that I have title insurance. I'd want to really know the abogado that was working on my case, and I'd want to make sure that I was 100% kind of secure in my investment, because it can be tricky doing business in a foreign country and doing it in a language that might not be your first language, and with accountants and lawyers and salespeople who you may not know completely and trust completely. So I would just say that be prudent and be careful in your ambitions to expand internationally. It can be rewarding, but you should tread carefully and probably get as much advice as you can from people who have done it before you.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, but there's really no jurisdictions in Southeast Asia in which foreigners can own land, right?
Well, that's not completely true. I mean, in Thailand, I gave one small example of when you can. In Singapore, there's instances where if you're a citizen, you can, and you can, become a citizen. I think for the most part, you're
It's
correct.
just very, very tricky.
It's not necessarily.
It's a pain in the ass, is what I'm trying to say, Edmund. It's a pain in the ass.
I mean, gosh, Taylor, have you been to Bali? It's just so nice. I just want to buy land there. So let's say you want to buy land in Bali, probably you'd buy a leasehold. Probably you'd get 99-year leasehold. You're not going to get the freehold that you would in other parts of the world. Right. South America, in terms of buying land, certainly from a strategic perspective, a little bit better than Southeast Asia.
And then flag 6, we have data security. First off, what's data security, buddy?
So this is basically looking after your online information, your online presence, your data information. How carefully are you taking care of your passports, or your passwords rather? Are you really watching after this information, or is somebody peering into your inbox and you might not even be knowing it? It's having some kind of cognizant awareness of what you do on the internet and how is that information protected. And I think it's very valuable to think about that, and it's not necessarily very expensive to think about that. So if you're going to be sending, encrypted emails to your lawyer, that might be worth the $39 a year or whatever it is, in order to kind of be sure that your information and your communication is somewhat secure as it can be.
And then what are some good spots to have this? So like, are you talking about having a website domain name like in one country? You're talking about having like an email provider in a different country, that kind of thing?
I mean, more than welcome to do that. And I think that you could probably get some benefit out of that. But I think really even just being aware that it's important to look after is a big step for most people. I mean, I come from a technology background, so I'm constantly thinking about this. Other individuals who might not be as technically savvy might need to just spend a little bit of time thinking about, okay, where is my email provider located? Where is my hosting provider located? Certainly, if you have a website or an internet-based business, this is something that you might want to consider. It might be useful for you to think about.
Okay, Edmund, I'm going to put you on the spot. Give us a good case study. You can design your own person here. You can have them a passport wherever they want, residency wherever they want, offshore company wherever they want. Design your own little Jason Bourne here. What do you do for the Six Flags? Where do they go?
Sure. All right. So I'm a British citizen. I have a dual citizenship with Switzerland. I live in Monaco. I have an offshore company in the Cayman Islands. I have some land in South America in 3 different countries. I jet around the world checking on my different businesses, and all of my information is completely secure. Is that a good guy right there to describe?
I love that guy. Can I be that guy, Edmund?
You can be Jason Bourne. Go for it, Taylor.
I love that Jason Bourne analogy. And I know that you have something really exciting called the PT Society. Finally, can you talk a little bit more about your PT Society?
Yeah, so this is a group that I've put together at my website, Flag Theory, and it's basically just a way for kind of the internationally minded, the expatriate entrepreneurs and the international investors to kind of meet and network and talk about these issues in a safe, secure location. So we have a group that's set up over encrypted chat, and then we also have meetups kind of around the world so that we can meet each other and talk shop about these issues, because they're important issues, and it's not necessarily something you can talk about with your neighbor Bob. He's not necessarily going to get it if you start mouthing off about residency or citizenship, and probably some of the listeners of your podcast aren't going to get it either. But that's okay. Not everybody needs to get it. But I personally think it's important, and most of the people that I interact with who are of some wealth and intelligence understand that these things are important, that one nation or one place or one government is not infallible. And it's important to kind of, again, keep your eggs in separate baskets as best you can, and worthwhile thinking about these things.
So, of course, that's at flagtheory.com. Is that right?
Correct.
So then, Ed, my head is spinning. I'm sure listeners are going to have their head spinning. We're trying to do a passport one place, residency someplace else, data security. What are maybe some final tips or pointers that you might want to share?
Sure. I'd say it's a lifelong plan, right? I mean, none of this stuff is going to get solved overnight, but it's worthwhile to at least be aware that you should start thinking about it and do research about it. I have a website when I talk a lot about it, and there's other people that talk about it as well. And if you can surround yourself with good advisors who are able to kind of adopt an international perspective, then that's useful. One problem that I found with financial advisors and legal advisors is they tend to have a specialty in one jurisdiction, and they make more money the more times that they advise you on that specific jurisdiction. And so for me, I personally like to have different advisors in different jurisdictions that I can lean on in different issues. And being able to kind of have a strategic mindset where I'm not tied to one place and I'm more fluid in my business and personal affairs is useful to me, but different strokes for different folks.
And then, Edmund, I have to ask you, before we get off, we have a guy named Grandpa, and I'm doing air quotes. We have Uncle Harry Schultz. I know W.G. Hill, he was a doctor. You need some kind of name. Like, what's going to be your fancy name? It can't be Edmund John. It's got to be, I don't know, something else. What is it going to be, buddy?
I don't know. I really, I'd rather have it be me. I don't necessarily want to hide behind a pseudonym, but to those guys, whatever they were running from, more power to them. But I'd rather stand and say, this is me. I'm not doing anything illegal, and I'm happy to kind of stand up for what I believe in.
Awesome. Why don't we leave it there? Thank you so much for joining me today, Edmund from Thailand.
Welcome, Taylor. Happy to be on the call. Thank you.
I want to thank Edmund once again for his awesome jam-packed episode about planting flags in different jurisdictions around the world and providing real-world case examples of why this makes so much sense. You can head on over to our site for complete show notes and more information about getting involved with his PT Society. And don't forget, if you're on the road as much as Edmund is, you need an amazing way to keep track of your files and receipts and eliminate paper clutter completely. Head on over to irelpodcast.com/shoe and open your free account right now and see all the benefits Shoebox has to offer. That's irelpodcast.com/shoe to get started.
You have been listening to the IREL Podcast with Taylor White. Be sure to hit up irelpodcast.com for more. That's irelpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.